The focus in Baltimore now on reassessing and rebuilding. Moments ago, top Obama administration officials spoke in Baltimore, announcing job training investments, part of the White House push to target root causes of the unrest. Today, CVS unveiled plans to reopen the pharmacy that was looted and burned. And music legend Prince announced he'll headline a Rally for Peace concert this weekend in the city of Baltimore. This national crisis is an opportunity to make things better for everyone. And the Baltimore mayor talked about that today.
While the past few days have been some of our darkest the city has ever seen, we've also seen a resilience that sets Baltimore apart in times of crisis. We will need that resilience as we move forward to continue reforming this police department.
Joining me now, Maryland State Senator Catherine Pugh, who represents West Baltimore. She also co-chairs a new panel of lawmakers reviewing police practices in the state, and veteran prosecutor Paul Henderson. Senator, let me go to you first. How important would it be for the Justice Department to investigate the Baltimore Police Department?
Well, I think it is important because, as you well know, what is happening in Baltimore is systemic to what's happening around the nation. And I think that it will allow us to continue to move forward, but at the same time, uncover some of the practices that are going forward in many of our police departments, because I believe that Baltimore will serve as a model in terms of how we reform police departments and bring about criminal justice reform that's needed, not just in Baltimore, but Philadelphia, New York, you name it, across the country.
Now, the new panel that you're co-chairing, tell me what you'll be looking at.
Well, there are a number of things. There were some bills that didn't get passed this past session, and one of the things that I asked for, Reverend Sharpton, was that the panel be broad enough and inclusive enough so that everybody in the state gets it, the issues that we're facing. So we'll be looking at whether, what kind of things should be done in terms of reforming the police department. I've asked for an ongoing effort to provide psychological evaluations for police officers who serve on a job over a period of time, because I believe that in some cases people lose the sensitivity that's needed in order to function in our communities. Cultural diversity training is obviously needed in our police departments. We're also looking at, body camera laws. Unfortunately for Baltimore, has moved forward because the mayor did put in a body camera program for the city of Baltimore, and I actually added an amendment to the body camera law for the state of Maryland so that Baltimore can continue to move forward. There's a whole host of issues that we'll look at as it relates to reforming the criminal justice system and making policing in our community fair for all, because as we all pay taxes, we pay taxes for police officers to protect and serve our communities and not for these kinds of incidents to continue to occur.
Here's what the New York Times writes about a possible Justice Department investigation, Paul, into the Baltimore Police Department. It says, quote, "The department has wide discretion in whether to conduct such an investigation, how broad to make it, and what kinds of remedies to seek." Tell me about the scale of the impact that a Justice Department investigation could have, Paul.
Complete and total. And so we already know that the Justice Department is investigating the facts and circumstances surrounding Freddie Gray's death, and what the call now is for them to investigate the entire department. So they'll be looking for pattern and practice of behavior. And if the government chooses to, at a federal level, they can essentially take over that entire department, control a lot of the funding that goes and how cops are paid, how cops are hired, and then mandate how they actually execute their job in terms of their training, how they appear on the street, and have accountability with an independent oversight agency watching and monitoring them. And so it's an open door, and it's all options are on the table.
And it could be concrete. It's not just to try to get past a crisis.
Absolutely. And it's long-standing. It's not a short-term thing typically either when something like this happens.
Senator Pugh, let's talk about the police department in Baltimore. Since 2011, It's paid out $5.7 million in 102 civil suits alleging police brutality. And since 2012, 5 people have died while in police custody. Does this speak to the need for a Justice Department investigation and for your new committee to look at things?
I think it's quite obvious. I mean, just think what we could do with that kind of money into our communities and our neighborhoods, especially in a neighborhood, as you well know, that is very depressed. And I inherited much of this community through the redistricting. But if you walk out into those neighborhoods and you look at those communities, and they look like the 1960s, many of them look like war zones. And so I think that this is really important in terms of the oversight, looking at how we move forward. I think that if we look at reforms that need to take place in our communities, that we will see that it's not just the police reforms that are needed, it's the sharing of wealth, the economic inequities that exist in our communities, the disparity that, of wealth that exists in our neighborhoods. So I think this investigation, this civil investigation, is very important. And as was already said, this really shines a light on policing and police activities. And I think will encourage police departments, not just in Baltimore, but around the country, you know, who don't want to come under this kind of civil oversight, to look at how they make their police departments better and more accessible and communicative to the neighborhood and accountable, absolutely.
Paul, let me tell you something that caught my interest this afternoon. Former President Bill Clinton said his 1994 crime bill cast too wide a net.
Absolutely.
It put too many people in jail, and he would support calls by his wife to change it. Listen to this, Paul.
We wound up putting so many people in prison that there wasn't enough money left to educate them, train them for new jobs. And I strongly support what she's doing. And I think any policy that was adopted when I was president in federal law that contributed to it should be changed.
Now, in full disclosure, I was one of those that raised questions and protested his crime bill, so I give him a lot of credit for taking this position publicly. But does this show the kind of political shift we're seeing when it comes to policing, Paul?
I think it absolutely does. And in all of these cases, I think it's very wise now as a political movement to recognize that we have to look at the mass incarceration process that we faced in the past and figure out how to address the disenfranchised communities that are constantly being underserved or overserved by the justice system. There has to be an equity, and I think his comments speak to that and understanding in hindsight the mistakes that have been made overall with the justice system that has created this problem that we're seeing flaring up in different parts of the country. But again and again and again, it's the same story that we're seeing played out over and over, where we need an intervention to address the need to have disenfranchised communities have parity in the justice system. And it's being played out on the ground with the police departments, obviously in Baltimore, and clearly from his statements, he wants that to take place throughout the rest of the nation.
It certainly has impacted Baltimore, mass incarceration,
Absolutely.
a lot of these things. How do you react to President Clinton's statement today?
Well, I think it was a great statement to make because, as you well know, in this country, 2 million people incarcerated at a cost of $30,000 to $80,000 a year. When you look at education, where we're talking about spending less than $15,000, $10,000 in some communities, imagine again what we could do with that money. But the thing that's really sad about all of this is the number of people who've been incarcerated who now have records for small minimum crimes or issues that they've been confronted with. And, you know, what about all those people who need to expunge their records, who don't even understand the process that they have to go through? And I can tell you personally, having dealt with the young man who ended up having to went to the hospital because people thought that he had been shot. But what we found out later was that he had not been shot, but he had some issues of his own. But at the same time, when I asked the young man, I said, how old are you? He says 23. I said, do you have your high school diploma? No. Do you have your GED? No, he doesn't. A frightened young man, misguided, not given the opportunities that need to be given, and at the same time has been in touch, you know, been in contact with the law before. And that's so many young people in this country who've come into contact with the criminal justice system. And so, you know, it concerns me that we did this mass incarceration. So what do we do to turn the lives around of those individuals who've gone through that?
Paul, I want to ask you about a legal development.
Yes.
One of the officers charged in Gray's death Edward Nero, is disputing the claim that the arrest was wrongful. He says the knife Freddie Gray was carrying was illegal. And, and you can see in the charging documents, police described it as a spring-assisted, one-hand operated knife. Can you shed light on this issue?
Absolutely. What they're talking about is, and it's going to be very esoteric and down in the weeds, evaluating whether or not the actual knife was a spring blade knife. Now, one of the things that is very interesting about Maryland is that it's an open carry weapon state for knives. So if he was just carrying that knife, it's not illegal at all. The issue is going to turn on if he was concealing the knife, and if he was concealing a knife that had a spring blade reaction when you open it, that may have been illegal. But the question that you have to ask is, beyond the detention, when they knew that he had the knife and how they knew it. Because even if they had a right to detain him, I don't know that they had a right to search him to find a knife if the knife was concealed. And even when you do all of that analysis, it's only going to take out 2 of the charges, because at the end of the day, this is in the weeds, and the bigger picture is, because of whatever happened with the interaction with Freddie Gray, he ended up dead because of the actions of the people that have been charged, and that's the real issue.
That is
so I think the knife is a side issue, and it gets an interesting legal discussion, but I think it's an esoteric discussion outside of the bigger picture that I think the Justice Department is focused on, that the mayor's office is focused on, and that the prosecutors there are going to be focused on. But all of that will come to light, and all of it will be argued when they have the preliminary hearing and the detention hearing for the officers.
State Senator Catherine Pugh and Paul Henderson, thank you both for your time tonight.
Thank you so much for having us, Rev.
Thank you, Al. Thank you so much.
Breaking news ahead, a bombshell